So now let's talk a bit about music in the Reformation. All right, so the early Reformation was divided into two streams, the Lutheran stream and the Reformed stream. The Lutheran stream was centered originally in what is now Germany. It was not one country back then. It was a bunch of little principalities. What is now Germany, and it spread to the Scandinavian countries and then elsewhere. So Scandinavia, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Faroe Islands, Finland, Iceland, and other countries as well. Now, the Reformed stream of the Reformation was centered initially in Switzerland, in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, in Geneva, with Calvin, and in the German-speaking part of Switzerland with Zwingli and Bullinger and others. And that stream, the Reformed stream, spread to the Netherlands, to France, to Scotland, and to other countries, including like Hungary and other places. So both of these streams, the Lutheran stream and the Reformed stream, influenced a third stream which came along a few years later, which was the Anglican stream. The Lutheran and the Reformed streams have a lot in common, but we're going to look at what made each stream distinct. So we look at Luther first, and the Lutherans. Luther could be described as more conservative, and we're not talking about politically conservative, okay? More conservative than Calvin and those in the Reformed movement. Luther was conservative in that he wanted to conserve or to preserve as much as he could of medieval Catholicism while reforming it. Reforming it for Luther included translating it from the Latin into the vernacular, which for him was German. So for this reason, many of the Lutheran chorales are based on Latin chants, translated into German, and many of the melodies of the chorales are based on the ancient chant melodies, but they're kind of spiced up rhythmically. Luther and the Lutherans and the Reformed both agreed on this, that they both believed there should be congregational singing. In the Middle Ages, congregational singing had gone away. All of the singing in the churches was done by the professionals. It was done by priests. It was done by monks. You had chant had become quite florid, what we call melismatic. So you had lots of notes per syllable. It was difficult to follow. And of course, the service would have been in Latin, which the common person did not understand. So both Luther and Calvin and all the reformers agreed, whether they were Lutheran or whether they were Reformed, all agreed that worship should be in the vernacular and that it should consist, well, I should say most of them. We don't talk about Bruno, we don't talk about Zwingli. Zwingli didn't believe in congregational singing. He was a weird agent. He believed in congregational participation, but it was all like these responsive recitations, like this half of the room, now this half, beautiful, that kind of thing. And instead of singing, which is just, I'm sorry, that's just ew. But besides him, he had terrible ideas about the Eucharist too. But anyway, besides him, the Reformed people and the Lutheran people all agreed that there should be congregational singing. In the Lutheran tradition, the answer to that was chorales. And they took for their musical inspiration the troubadour songs, which were popular among royalty and the nobility. Now you remember the Reformation period corresponds with the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the Renaissance. So that's where we are historically. So these troubadour songs are what's in vogue at the time. So they were performed in the royal courts, they were performed in the noble courts, so we could call it music that was in Luther's day deemed fit for a king. Now, let's move on to the next slide. We need to talk about bar form. Remember a second ago when we sang A Mighty Fortress? Remember how the first part of the tune repeated exactly again for the next bit of text? We had the ba 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 da 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 da. Then what do? The same thing exactly, right? Bum 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 bum. Again. Then what do we have? Then we had something new. Bum bum ba dum ba 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 ba. That's new, right? So we have A, and then we have A, and then we have B. A, B. That is called, in music theory, that is called bar form. Don't ask me why, but that's what it's called. Okay, that's just what it's called. It's called bar form. I only mention this, and so many chorales fit this pattern. Wake, awake, for night is flying. Same. That's bar form. Okay. So many chorale tunes fit this pattern. I mention this because somewhere along the line, somebody who didn't know what bar form was read that Luther's chorale tunes were in bar form and thought that meant they were songs based on songs that he heard in a pub. Okay? This gets passed around as common knowledge. You hear people say, well, Luther used beer drinking songs as hymn tunes. No, he didn't. Even if he had, so big deal. That wouldn't make it a bad thing. But it didn't happen, is what I'm saying. Okay. Yeah, we don't want to talk about it. So I've heard people apply this to Charles Wesley. Okay, big problem there. Charles Wesley didn't even write music. Okay, Charles Wesley didn't write music at all. He didn't write hymn tunes. He wrote texts, not tunes. And so I don't, where these stories come from. I don't know. One thing that you can learn from like reading Eric Routley, who was the great hymnologist, is that anytime you read like a beloved hymn story, 9 times out of 10 it's not true. All right, so the chorales, let's move on to the next thing. Chorales are written in 4-part harmony, and they were intended to be sung in 4-part harmony. The Genevan psalm tunes that we looked at more in depth last week, those originally were done in unison. Calvin just felt like that there was more, it was a better thing for people to sing in unison because it was like unity and oneness, all that kind of stuff. But the only problem is if God had wanted us to sing in unison all the time, He would have given us the same vocal range. And some of us have lower voices and some of us have higher voices. So in a sense, it makes sense, at least some of the time, to sing in harmony. The chorales are harmonized, and many were originally very rhythmic, as we saw a minute ago when we sang A Mighty Fortress. All right, so there were thousands of chorales. Let's go on. There were thousands of chorales written during the Reformation period. The ones that have stood the test of time come predominantly from 2 authors. First, Martin Luther himself. He wrote many chorales, including A Mighty Fortress, which we just sang. Also, From Depths of Woe, which is his paraphrase of Psalm 130. And also, Christ Jesus lay in death's strong bands, a.k.a. Christ lag in Todesbanden, which is an Easter hymn. And you think, well, that doesn't sound very Eastery to me. Well, that's just the first line. It gets better, right? It gets to the resurrection. He also wrote, From Heaven Above to Earth I Come, a.k.a. Vom Himmel hoch, which is a beloved Christmas hymn in the Lutheran tradition. The other one was Philip Nicolai. Now, Nicolai was a generation after Luther, and he followed in Luther's footsteps as a prolific writer of chorales. Some of his hymns include Wake, Awake, for Night is Flying, a.k.a. Wachet auf, and also O Morning Star, How Fair and Bright, a.k.a. How Brightly Beams, or How Lovely Shines the Morning Star, depending on which translation you're looking at, a.k.a. Wie schön leuchtet der Morgenstern, if you're into that. Both of these are sung during Advent, Wake Awake and How Brightly Beams the Morning Star, are sung during Advent, and both of these form the basis for famous cantatas by J.S. Bach. All right. Now, about 20 years after the Reformation began in Germany, Lutheranism spread to the Scandinavian countries, and so did the writing and the singing of chorales. Many of the most beloved chorales are from the Scandinavian countries, such as Rejoice, Rejoice, Believers, which is an Advent chorale, traditionally sung to a Swedish tune called Haftronens lampa färdig, which means have your trimmed lamps ready. Often sung third Sunday of Advent because that's Gaudete or Rejoice Sunday. There's also O Day Full of Grace, which is from Denmark. This one was written for Pentecost Sunday. It was also written to celebrate 1,000 years of Christianity in Denmark. So there's a line in that hymn about that his church he has kept these 1,000 years, and hungering souls did nourish. Just talking about it was written for the anniversary of Christianity in Denmark. And then we have Lost in the Night. This is another Advent hymn, and it's from Norway. The hymn itself, the chorale itself, the text is from Norway, but the traditional tune is from Finland. There's so many we could name. We'll name just one more, which is How Fair the Church of Christ Shall Stand, which, like O Day Full of Grace, is from Denmark. All right, so that just gives you a little flavor of the chorale and the influence of the chorale from the Lutheran tradition.